There are some artists whose lives aren't confined to the spotlight. They quietly ripple through the pages of American musical history. Glen Campbell was one of them. He wasn't just the Rhinestone Cowboy, the dazzling symbol of the 1970s country pop wave. He was also the embodiment of a life full of contradictions. Poverty and fame, brilliance and decline, clarity and forgetfulness. From a boy born among the cotton fields of Arkansas to his final days surrounded by family at the age of 81, Glen Campbell lived a journey that was almost unimaginable. From an anonymous session guitarist to a national superstar, from quiet recording studios to television screens across America. Yet behind that warm voice and gentle smile lay a world of wounds, failed marriages, years of addiction, and ultimately, a harrowing battle with Alzheimer's disease. This article will take you through that entire journey, not just to tell the story of an artist, but to help you understand why that voice, though now silenced, still echoes in the memories of millions. Early life. Before the stage lights, before becoming the beloved Rhinestone Cowboy of America, Glen Campbell was just a barefoot boy walking the cotton rows of Arkansas, where poverty wasn't an exception, but the norm. Glen Travis Campbell was born on April 22, 1936 in Billstown, a small community near the town of Delight in Pike County, Arkansas. The seventh of 12 children, Glen grew up in a working-class Scottish-Irish farming family. His parents, John Wesley and Carrie Dell Campbell, toiled under the hot sun, growing cotton, corn, watermelons, and potatoes to feed their large household. That life of hardship left little room for big dreams, but it planted the seed of something else: music. At the age of 4, Glen received a $5 guitar from Sears, a gift from his father. Seemingly modest, yet it would change his life. Under the guidance of his Uncle Boo, Glen learned his first chords with dirt still on his hands. He practiced whenever he could, after working in the fields, on sultry summer nights, or during the few quiet moments of a long, hard day. Back home, everybody knew how to play and sing, Campbell once said. Music wasn't a luxury. It was part of daily life, heard at dinner, in church, or from the old radio crackling atop a worn wooden table. And even as a child, Glen began to stand out. By the age of 6, he was performing on local radio stations, becoming a small-town sensation, not because people recognized his talent, but because he made them believe that poverty didn't mean you couldn't shine. Though he never studied music formally, Glen developed an exceptionally sharp musical ear by listening to records and the radio. His greatest childhood idol was Django Reinhardt, the legendary French guitarist, whom Glen called the best I've ever heard. His talent continued to grow quietly, among fields and melodies, amid hardship and a longing to break free. That environment, poor but filled with the honest, rustic sounds of the South, became the root of Glen Campbell's artistic identity. Later hits like Wichita Lineman, Galveston, and By the Time I Get to Phoenix carried the spirit of that upbringing. Gentle, unadorned, filled with loneliness, yet deeply humane. Campbell never sang to impose emotion. He sang as if sharing a familiar ache with the listener, like a friend speaking from experience. Because he was raised in the harshness of nature and the warmth of human decency, his music was never pretentious or flashy. It was raw, real, and deep, like the earth, like the wind, like the memories of the boy he once was. Glen Campbell carried that country spirit with him for life, not just in his lyrics, but in his demeanor. The way he quietly stepped onto stage, picked up his guitar, and sang as if it were just him and a radio in the Arkansas night. At age 14, Glen left school and moved to Houston to work alongside his brothers, first as an insulation installer, then at a gas station. But his love for music wouldn't let him settle. In his spare time, he played guitar at fairs, church festivals, choirs, and gradually returned to local radio. Music quietly paved a new path, guiding him away from the anonymous grind of manual labor. By the age of 17, Glen set off for Albuquerque, New Mexico, joining his uncle's band, Dick Bills and the Sandia Mountain Boys, officially entering the world of professional music. It was the start of a journey no one could have predicted, from the dusty fields of Arkansas to the hearts of an entire nation. Early career. After leaving behind his hometown in Arkansas and the endless cotton fields of his youth, Glen Campbell made his way to Houston, then continued drifting through the southwestern states, with an old guitar in hand and a dream he hadn't yet named. At the age of 17, he joined his uncle's band, Dick Bills and the Sandia Mountain Boys, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, performing both on local radio and in children's TV shows. It wasn't a grand stage, but it was the first and most important step that brought him closer to the professional world of music. In those early years away from home, Campbell worked any job he could to stay afloat, from insulation installer and gas station attendant to a hired musician at fairs, churches, and small-town bars. By day, he did manual labor. By night, he played his guitar, gospel tunes and heartfelt ballads soaked in the spirit of his rural upbringing. Music couldn't yet pay his bills, but it was the reason he kept moving, kept hoping, through unfamiliar towns and lonely nights. Los Angeles, the city of opportunity, became his decisive destination. In 1960, he moved there with nothing but his guitar and a list of recording studios to knock on. At first, he was just a nameless session guitarist, backing demo recordings. No credits on album sleeves, no high fees, but each session was a chance for Campbell to learn something new. And gradually, thanks to his work ethic, precision, and rare musical sensitivity, he began to catch the attention of producers. The first producer to truly believe in him was veteran bassist Joe Osborne, who introduced Campbell to the now legendary studio ensemble, The Wrecking Crew. It was there that Glen truly came into his own, playing on recordings for Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys, Elvis Presley, and learning how to move people with music even from the shadows of the studio, far from the spotlight. However, the road to becoming a solo artist wasn't easy. His first album, Turn Around, Look at Me, 1961, reached only number 62 on the Billboard chart. Though a respectable start, it wasn't enough to make him a star. Over the next several years, under contracts with Crest Records and later Capitol Records, Campbell released a series of singles, most of which failed commercially. Rejections, unanswered calls, shelved recordings. These setbacks made him question at times whether the dream was truly his to chase. But Campbell didn't give up. Quietly, he returned to his guitar, continued playing for others, learning from them, and waiting for the moment that would be his. Then one day, fate arrived in the form of a song called Gentle on My Mind, a track he happened to hear on the radio, which he later recorded himself with raw simplicity and sincerity, true to who he was. That song didn't just pull him out of obscurity, it defined his entire artistic identity. A storyteller who never needed to shout, never needed spectacle, only needed to sing what was real from the heart. Career success. Sometimes it only takes one song to change an entire life. For Glen Campbell, "Gentle on My Mind" was that song. In 1967, while driving through Los Angeles one afternoon, Glen happened to hear John Hartford's recording of the song on the radio. Its rustic melody and lyrics, like the monologue of a drifting man, struck a deep chord in Campbell's heart. He recorded his own version using a simple arrangement with earthy guitar strings and a voice that felt like a story told by a fire. No one expected that this song would usher in a new era for modern country music and elevate Campbell from a hired session guitarist to a national name. "Gentle on My Mind" was a breakout success, not only beloved by audiences, but it also earned Campbell 4 Grammy Awards that year, a historic feat for a solo country artist. And that wasn't all. That same year, he released "By the Time I Get to Phoenix," a song full of loneliness and lyrical elegance that brought him closer to the pop and adult contemporary audience. Both songs became 1960s anthems, showing that country music was no longer just for the farms, but had made its way into millions of American living rooms. In 1968, Glen released "Wichita Lineman," another track written by Jimmy Webb, though so personally performed that people often forgot who penned it. With just the opening line, "I am a lineman for the county," Campbell seemed to stop time across America. His voice didn't sound like a star. It sounded like a friend, a lonely soul among the telephone wires and longing. "Wichita Lineman" stayed on the charts for 15 weeks, reaching #1, 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, and topping both the country and adult contemporary charts. It became a genre-defying masterpiece, country music that played on rock, soul, and pop stations, and even found its way into university libraries as a modern, poetic work. Campbell's career exploded from there. He launched his own television show, The Glen Campbell Good Time Hour, on CBS, 1969 to 1972, bringing country music to primetime television and into millions of homes each week. More than just a show, it was a cultural bridge, introducing urban America to country music through Campbell's smile, charm, and authenticity. Not long after, he appeared in the film True Grit, 1969, alongside the legendary John Wayne, performing the title song of the film, a role that earned him both Oscar and Golden Globe nominations for Best Original Song. Once again, Glen Campbell shattered expectations. A country singer could also be a television star, a movie actor, and a cultural icon. Throughout the 1970s, Campbell continued to score major hits with Galveston, Rhinestone Cowboy, and Southern Nights, each topping multiple charts. Rhinestone Cowboy became the biggest hit of his career, selling over 2 million copies and elevating him to superstar status, not just in country music, but in mainstream pop culture. Glen Campbell was never just a singer. He was a storyteller, using guitar strings and vocal tone as his language. In an era when country music was often tied to honky-tonk or deeply Southern rustic vibes, Campbell carved out his own path, softer, more introspective, more refined. He brought pop sensibility into country without ever losing its humble soul. He sang as if he wasn't singing at all, just whispering stories of sorrow, memories, or silent goodbyes. His masterful guitar work, clean arrangements, and effortless vocals gave his music lasting power, even among those who weren't traditional country fans. Artists such as Keith Urban, Vince Gill, Brad Paisley, and even mainstream figures like Ed Sheeran have all acknowledged learning from Glen Campbell how to infuse each note and lyric with sincerity, controversy, and tragedy. To the public, Glen Campbell was the image of a charming performer with a sweet voice, appearing on national television with a gentle smile and his signature guitar. But behind the stage lights was another world, one where he struggled with fame, loneliness, addiction, and a string of deeply fractured relationships. Campbell married 4 times, and nearly all of those marriages bore the marks of controversy, pain, and collapse. His first marriage, to Diane Marie Kirk, came when he was just a headstrong 17-year-old. They had a son who died shortly after a premature birth, followed by a daughter. But youth and poverty quickly wore down the fragile relationship, and the couple divorced after 4 years, leaving behind a silent wound in Glen's heart that he rarely spoke of later in life. His second wife, Billie Jean Nunley, a hairdresser from Albuquerque, stood by him through his rise from obscurity to superstardom. They had 3 children together, but also endured the harsh years when Glen was consumed by fame, pressure, and alcohol. In 1975, Billie filed for divorce, ending a 16-year marriage. By then, Glen was a household name, but in his private life, he was losing direction. Shortly afterward, he married Sarah Jan Davis, the ex-wife of singer Mac Davis. This third marriage lasted less than 4 years and ended quietly, marked by emotional wounds rather than headlines, another scar on the already fragile soul of the artist. During this period, he spiraled deeper into addiction, reckless behavior, and fleeting affairs. But the most bitter and most public chapter came with his scandalous affair with Tanya Tucker, the fiery young country star over 2 decades his junior. Their romance was intense and headline-grabbing, marked by lavish parties and public arguments. When Glen was a national icon in his 40s, Tanya was just in her early 20s, rebellious, wild, and magnetic. Their relationship was like a collision of fire and fire, passionate, irresistible, but ultimately destructive. Tanya would later recall Glen as often jealous, quick-tempered, and out of control when drunk. Campbell himself admitted the relationship was a mistake, a period when he was no longer himself. Fans of the polished Rhinestone Cowboy were shocked when Glen was arrested in 2003 for driving under the influence and assaulting a police officer. The image of him in a prison jumpsuit, disheveled, with vacant eyes, was like a slap to the American dream he once symbolized. But that very moment became a turning point, a moment of reckoning. It marked the start of his journey toward redemption, with himself, with the audience, and with those he had hurt. It wasn't until his 4th marriage to Kim Woolen that Glen found true peace. Kim was not only his wife, but his caregiver, his companion, the one who helped him through the slow devastation of memory loss. They had 3 children together, who would eventually join him on stage one last time when he could no longer remember the lyrics, but still remembered how to play the guitar. In 2011, Glen Campbell publicly announced he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Instead of retreating in silence, he chose to face it and share it. His farewell goodbye tour became one of the most moving journeys in American music history. On stage, he would sometimes forget melodies or misname songs, but every time his fingers touched the strings, something returned. The crowd would fall silent. They didn't see a sick man. They saw an artist fighting to live one more moment in music. The documentary I'll Be Me, 2014, captured those powerful, heartbreaking moments of a legend slowly losing pieces of himself. His final recorded song, "I'm Not Gonna Miss You" was a farewell unlike any other. "I'm not gonna miss you," as if he were comforting those left behind rather than asking for sympathy. The song was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song and became one of the most poignant ballads about death in modern memory. Glen Campbell passed away on August 8, 2017, in the arms of his family in Nashville. He left the world like a storyteller finishing his final line, tired, empty, but overflowing with love. Personal life. Glen Campbell didn't like talking much about himself. In interviews, he would often smile gently, sidestep overly personal questions, and if he shared anything truly deep, it was always through music, where his heart found its voice. After all the heartbreak, missteps, and fame he had experienced, Glen seemed to understand that a life doesn't have to be perfect to have meaning. He never painted himself as the ideal husband or flawless father, but he never turned away from the responsibility of being human. The children from his previous marriages, despite the distance and past wounds, were gradually reconnected with him during his final years. For Glen, redemption was a way of life. The person who helped him hold himself together during his darkest times was Kim Woolen, his last wife and most profound life partner. Kim was more than a companion. She became the mirror in which he saw himself more clearly. In one interview, Glen spoke of her in a hushed voice. "She loved me even when I didn't deserve it, and that made me have to be better." Outside of music, Campbell was a surprisingly simple man. He loved fishing, playing golf, spending hours wandering around the garden, or tinkering with his guitar in the garage. He cherished the little things, a home-cooked meal, a phone call from one of his children, or those rare, peaceful moments untouched by flashing cameras. Despite the stumbles in his life, Glen maintained a few rare, loyal friendships in the often transient world of entertainment. Chief among them was his deep connection with songwriter Jimmy Webb, the man behind many of Campbell's most soul-stirring songs. Their relationship wasn't one of star and songwriter, but of two kindred spirits, bound by loneliness and melody. Webb once wrote, "Glen sang my songs as if they were his own life stories, and truth is, most of them were." Toward the end, as memories began to fade under the weight of Alzheimer's, Glen Campbell didn't seem afraid or regretful. There was a rare kind of acceptance in him, as if every challenge, every fall, every triumph and failure had been a necessary note in the symphony called life. Once, when asked what he considered his greatest accomplishment, Campbell didn't mention his Grammys or name his biggest hits. He simply said, "I lived long enough to fix my mistakes, and I didn't give up." Legacy and influence. Glen Campbell was not just an artist. He was a memory, gentle as the breeze over southern fields, humble as a radio humming on a summer afternoon, and resilient as a guitar string that never snapped, no matter how tightly life pulled it. Over a career spanning more than 50 years, he released more than 70 albums and sold over 45 million records worldwide. He scored 12 #1 hits, earned dozens of gold and platinum discs, and won 10 Grammy Awards, including the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012. But those numbers, impressive as they are, still fall short of capturing what he truly left behind. Because what made Campbell special wasn't just the accolades, but the way his music reached people, not flashy, not preachy, just as simple and honest as the way he lived. A Glen Campbell song could make a single mother in Kentucky cry, make a factory worker in Ohio pause to wipe the sweat from his brow, or make an aging soldier in Texas chuckle alone in the night. because Glen was singing the things they'd felt but never knew how to say. He was a pioneer of the country pop crossover, a bridge between Nashville and Hollywood, between Southern tradition and mainstream tastes. Before Glen, country music largely remained confined to rural circles and local festivals. After Glen, it played in the living rooms of millions of American families, through CBS television, major award shows, and the hearts of people who never imagined they'd fall in love with country music. His style, a smooth blend of country, pop, folk, and soul, shaped countless artists after him. From Keith Urban, Brad Paisley, and Vince Gill, to even non-country stars like Ed Sheeran and John Mayer, who have openly said they learned from Campbell how to sing with the heart, not just with technique. Beyond music, Campbell left a deep imprint on American popular culture. He appeared in numerous films and television programs and became an icon for a generation of middle-class Americans. Hopeful, hard-working, and quietly dreaming. When he sang Rhinestone Cowboy, people didn't just hear a song, they saw themselves in it. Ordinary folks who believed that if they kept walking, even with bleeding feet, someday the light would call their name. And even in illness, he remained a symbol of courage. By publicly confronting Alzheimer's, continuing to perform with his children, and saying goodbye through music, he inspired millions of families facing the same struggle. The film I'll Be Me wasn't just a documentary. It was a love letter from art to human memory. Glen Campbell didn't fade away like a dying star. He ended his journey like a ballad, quiet, beautiful, and forever etched in the hearts of those who listened. And if one day you're driving through the American countryside and hear an old radio playing Wichita Lineman, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, or just the opening notes of Southern Nights, pause for a moment. Because somewhere in the wind, humming through the power lines, Glen Campbell might still be whispering a story just for you, a story that never gets old. Glen Campbell didn't leave this world like a shooting star. He quietly closed the curtain on his journey the same way he had always stepped onto the stage. Not loud, not boastful, just carrying his guitar, his voice, and a heart once broken, but never short of love. He came into the world from a poor countryside with nothing but scorching sun, dry soil, and a cheap guitar. But from that very place, he sang the sorrow of working people, the loneliness of wandering souls, and the fragile hope of those who once stood in the dark, still dreaming of a distant light. From Wichita Lineman to Rhinestone Cowboy, from small-town radio to the biggest stages in America, from mistakes to redemption, from fading memory to a farewell song that left the world breathless. Glen Campbell lived a life full of scars, but never once faded. He isn't a legend because he was perfect. He is a legend because he dared to live truthfully, with himself, with his audience, and with every note he ever sang. And if one day you happen to hear a familiar melody drifting through a quiet afternoon, pause for a moment. Because somewhere Glen Campbell might still be softly singing in the memory of America and in the hearts of all of us.